The massive crystalline chamber of the Galactic Tribunal stretched beyond sight, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent veins that carried the thoughts of 1,000 species. At its center, a lone figure sat in the accused circle, a human named Marcus Chen, his weathered hands folded calmly in his lap, his dark eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the assembled judges. High Chancellor Vexithara's multiple heads swayed with amusement, her serpentine forms coiling around the supreme bench. "The primitive remains silent," she hissed to her fellow judges, her voice amplified through the chamber's neural network. "Perhaps it cannot comprehend the magnitude of its crimes." A ripple of chittering laughter echoed from the Zephyrian delegation, their crystalline bodies chiming like broken glass. Judge Kretak, his insectoid mandibles clicking with disdain, leaned forward on his perch. 3 cycles we have presented evidence. 3 cycles of testimony from the survivors of Kepler 442b, the witnesses from the Andromeda conflict, the victims of humanity's so-called liberation campaigns. And still, this specimen says nothing. The human did not flinch. His breathing remained steady, his posture unchanged. Around him, holographic displays showed the smoking ruins of worlds, the scattered debris of once mighty fleets, the testimonies of aliens who spoke of humanity's ruthless efficiency in war. "Your Honor," interjected Prosecutor Naltek, his 6 arms gesticulating wildly as his translator struggled to keep pace, "we have documented proof of 17 separate incidents where human forces deliberately ignored galactic conventions. They show no mercy to surrendering enemies, no respect for sacred breeding grounds, no regard for established territorial boundaries. They are a plague upon civilized space." More murmurs of agreement swept through the gallery. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Humanity had emerged from their small blue world barely 2 centuries ago, and in that brief span, they had carved a bloody path through the galaxy. Every major power had felt their sting. Every peaceful accord had been shattered by their presence. Chancellor Vexithara's eyes glittered with satisfaction. The tribunal recognizes that this is unprecedented. Never before has a species stood accused of such systematic violations of galactic law. The human species has proven itself incompatible with civilized society. She paused, savoring the moment. "However, in the interest of fairness, we will allow the accused one final opportunity to speak before we render judgment." The chamber fell silent. Even the bioluminescent walls seemed to dim in anticipation. Thousands of eyes, sensors, and consciousness nodes focused on the small, fragile creature at the center of it all. Marcus Chen slowly raised his head. "You want to know why we fight," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow carrying clearly through the vast space. The translation matrices struggled to capture not just his words, but the weight behind them. "You want to understand why we ignore your precious conventions? Why we don't surrender when you think we should? Why we keep pushing forward when any sane species would retreat?" He stood, and something in his movement made the nearest guard step back involuntarily. "I was on Kepler 442b, he continued, his voice growing stronger. "I was there when your civilized hegemony decided that the human colonists were expanding too quickly. I watched your peacekeeping forces herd 10,000 children into biomass converters because they were deemed excess population according to sustainable development protocols." A murmur ran through the chamber, but Chen's eyes silenced it. "I was at Proxima Station when the Zephyrian Trade Consortium decided our shipping routes were cutting into their profits. I held my daughter as she died from their non-lethal toxins, designed to cause maximum suffering while technically avoiding assassination charges under galactic law." The Zephyrian delegation's chiming grew discordant, their crystalline forms dimming. "You speak of territorial boundaries," Chen said, turning his gaze to Judge Kretak. "Your people marked 17 human worlds as culturally significant nesting sites, after we'd been living there for 50 years. Overnight, 3 million humans became illegal squatters on their own homesteads. When we protested, you graciously offered to relocate us to appropriate habitats, radiation-soaked moons and asteroid mining facilities." His voice began to carry an edge, sharp as a blade. "You call us ruthless because we don't surrender, because we don't accept your judgment when you decide we're inconvenient, because we refuse to die quietly when it suits your politics." The chamber was now completely silent. Even the wall veins had stopped pulsing. "Every world you've shown as evidence of our crimes was a world where you tried to erase us. Every battle you call unprovoked was us refusing to let you relocate, sterilize, or harvest us for the greater good of your galactic order. You want to know why we show no mercy to surrendering enemies? Because we learned that your surrenders are just pauses before the next atrocity. Chen stepped forward, and the entire tribunal seemed to lean back. You've built a civilization based on the idea that problems can be solved by committee, that conflicts can be resolved through proper channels, that peace comes from everyone knowing their place and staying in it. You've convinced yourselves that this makes you civilized, but what you've really built is a machine for crushing anyone who doesn't fit your definitions. His eyes swept across the assembled judges, and many found they could not meet his gaze. We are what happens when your victims refuse to die politely. We are the consequence of your civilized cruelty. Every human ship, every human soldier, every human world that won't bow to your authority. We are the bill coming due for centuries of your enlightened brutality. The silence stretched on, heavy and absolute. In that moment, the vast chamber felt small, cramped, as if the walls were closing in on them all. So yes, Chen said quietly, sitting back down, we are incompatible with your civilization. Thank whatever gods you worship for that. Chancellor Vexithera stared at him, her multiple heads swaying uncertainly. Around the chamber, the gathered representatives of 1,000 worlds sat frozen, seeing themselves reflected in the human's words and finding the image unbearable. In the end, there was no judgment. How could there be? The human had spoken, and in his silence afterward, the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath.